Hey, welcome back to the Cooking for Beginners podcast. I am your host, Chef Brian, and of course, I've got my incredible co-host with me, Del Lewis, who also happens to be my older brother. And the whole concept of this podcast is to not only teach you tips and tricks and techniques on how to become a better cook, but to give you a different angle on how to, from a beginner's perspective, someone outside of myself, helping you feel a little bit more confident about maybe some questions that you may have. So, I think I may keep my brother around for a little longer, but let's bring him in here and let him explain to you what his role is going to be. He's actually going to try to keep me on the straight and narrow. So, Del, welcome. Good to have you back. What's going on?
Yeah, so why should my job on this podcast be any different than my job on the rest of your life? Is keeping you on the straight and narrow.
Oh, that hurts. Oh, that hurts. Oh, it hurts.
So
Very true. Very true.
that's my job. Yeah, no, I'm excited. Always to hang out with you and to hang out with your peeps, and get them more comfortable in the kitchen, because it's a place not to be afraid of. It's a place where you can have a whole lot of fun. And I think, we've had a lot of fun over the years, playing around in the kitchen. And I think that's what we're just going to be talking about today is how to make that work.
Yeah, I mean, a little full disclosure, let everybody know we've been in business, we've done business together quite a bit. We've had a couple of restaurants. We've done we've done quite a bit when it comes to food, but again, the purpose of this podcast is to let people in on some of the family secrets, how we survived as brothers, some of the things that go on behind the scenes people don't understand. I mean, you call me, 3, 4 times a year on cue just to ask me questions about Thanksgiving sides or, a Christmas dish or whatever it may be. And I'm always happy to share that information with you. But what I find about those calls so exciting is it really is exactly what we're trying to do for the rest of the world. I had mentioned on one of my cooking videos recently that my goal, and I think this podcast can help with this goal, is to create 1,000 new cooks by the end of this year, and we're well on our way. But this is a great start. So if you're listening to this podcast, open up both ears because we're gonna have some good nuggets for you. And I know Dell's gonna to drill me with a couple of things that I hope to explain well to give you guys some insight on just how fun cooking can be, how therapeutic it can be, and, not to be so fearful of what can turn out to be just an amazing experience for anybody, not only for your health, but just to create family. And I think it's a great place to start, Dale, is that it taught me a little bit about how we were brought up, and how food is
Yeah.
all part of that.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to start. But before I do that, I just want to clarify what I think you're trying to do. And you can tell me if I'm off mark here, right? I think if anybody's listening to this thinks about who's that person or people in your life that in your family that have been, good cooks, right? They can go into the kitchen, they can say, "Hey, are you hungry? Let me make you something." They go in the kitchen and they do that, right? I think that, unless I'm off the mark, I think that's what you're trying to create is to help people be more like that type of person. You're not trying
Definitely.
to create the next Gordon Ramsay or the next Emerald Lagasse, right? It's like, you can do that if you want, sure, but I think you're just trying to get people to feel good about being in the kitchen and make stuff that tastes good and feels good, right?
Absolutely. And you make a great point. This is not about me coming on here or you even, echoing my achievements in the culinary field. That's not what this is about. Because if you wanted to become a chef and you're watching this, then you probably have already decided you wanted to go to culinary school. That's not what this is about. This is really about getting in and creating something. In fact, it's kind of the anti-culinary school, to be honest. I'm trying to rip away a lot of the jargon and red tape that is in the language of culinary arts and kind of bring it down to the basics. So I think truly that's some of where the fear comes in,
Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
these terms and you and I laugh all the time because you are the math person in the family and but I say all the time, I think there are a lot of people that are afraid of recipes as soon as they start seeing fractions, and there's probably people watching this podcast right now that are shaking their heads.
I don't cook. How am I supposed to cook for them?
I mean, they're scary,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep. Yep.
1/3 teaspoon. What's the difference between a teaspoon and a tablespoon? Third cup for, and then, oh my goodness, don't get me started on someone that's from the US and they get a recipe that's in, the metric system. I mean, that's like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness,
Yeah.
grams.
Yeah.
Oh, so I'm just trying to bring it down to some basic, simple techniques to get people to get excited about cooking.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I think that you've taught me over the years is like you can look at that recipe and it can have those fractions, but as long as you have a ballpark idea of what that is, you don't have to like measure it exactly to that fraction, right? So if it says 3/4 of a cup, that'll be exactly 3/4 of a cup. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier about our family and just sort of the setup there, right? So two things I want to mention. One is that Brian and I were fortunate enough to have a great grandmother that was like an awesome cook. I mean, just like a wizard in the kitchen. And I tell people, people don't even believe me when I say this, but I can remember vividly being in Texas and we called her Mamma and sitting down or coming in for breakfast and there are Mama's homemade English muffins,
Yeah.
which she set next to me her homemade butter, which I put on and then put on the homemade jam.
Yep.
So this is what's possible in the kitchen. And this is a person that, obviously never went to culinary school. I mean, just learned how to do these things. And she talks about how, it's you get to eyeball things, right? It's like, and so the recipe calls for a certain amount and you pour it in, doesn't have to be exact, right? It's like you get over time, you just get comfortable with what works. And the other thing I just want to mention is, so our mother, and she says this with great pride, and I listen to it with great pride. She says, "I had four boys, right? We had no girls in our family. The four boys, and you got to understand. So we might be older than the average bear. I mean, we're no longer in our 20s. So we come up from a generation where the man in the house was usually out working and the woman in the house was usually doing the homemaking, right? And that's just our generation. No political comment on that, but that's just our generation. And so she, raising four boys in that time, said, okay, I realize that you're all probably going to get married at some point in time. And I don't want that person that, to have to take care of you and be that person that has to be in the kitchen. If your spouse wants to be out, she should be able to be out. And you should be able to be self-sufficient. If you're single, you need to be self-sufficient. So she taught us all how to cook. All right. Now Brian took it to a whole new level and decided this is what he wanted to do as a profession and his vocation. So he took it to a whole new level. But all four of us can cook, can get in the kitchen and can cook. And that's because of what our mom did and the reason that she did it. She said, I did not want your spouse to be tied to that kitchen. I want you to be self-sufficient. So anyway, I think that's important for everybody to understand.
Yeah, and it's a great point, and it was one of the reasons, maybe even the main reason, subconsciously, that I wanted to start this channel because I believe in full honesty and disclosure. I probably, because of what you just explained about mom and she had these four boys, no girls, and she was determined to give us this skill. And yes, I took it a little further, but like you said, we all knew how to feed ourselves at a very young age. And I think because of that, for many, many years, decades even, I took that for granted in thinking that everyone kind of was
Mhm.
brought up that way and knew the foundations of cooking. And to my surprise, it is unbelievable how many people struggle or just want nothing to do with the kitchen for whatever reason. And that's not any slight on anyone that is struggling. That is the purpose of this channel and of this podcast, is because I believe that it's a great skill to have. And it doesn't take much to get the confidence and to learn and to get rid of the fear and the anxiety. And as you pointed out correctly, Del, you don't have to be precise. You get to a place where you just get comfortable, just like eyeballing it. And also, you also understand your own palate, a little bit more salt, a little bit more sugar, a little bit more of this, a little more of that, depending on what you're making. You start to create your own personal recipes, which is really the fun of it
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great point about mom.
And I think that's a basic tenet of any skill that you learn, right? And so if I give you kind of an analogy, just think about learning to drive, right? Um, and I can remember 15, 16 getting behind a wheel for the first time. Of course, our brother Jeff was driving when he was about 10, but that's a whole different story that we can go into later. But, but 15, 16, getting ready to get my license and getting behind a wheel and being scared stiff, right? Because it's like this, cars are zipping by and flying around. And it's like, how do I know when to stop, where to stop, make the left turn, right turn, all that sort of stuff. It's like you come up to the line at the stoplight and you're supposed to be 10 feet away or whatever. That, like when you first start, that seems like a thing that you have to do from precision, right? It's like, how do I get to 10 feet? I don't want to be 12 feet. I don't want to be 8 feet, right? But then if you think about it, now you probably could drive, almost in your sleep. Don't recommend that, but and you think about all things that you do kind of subconsciously. And the kitchen can be the same thing. You can get to that point. So I think that's
Yep,
what you're trying to do with folks.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
So
awesome.
fire away. What's on your mind today?
Oh, let's see. What would I want to talk about? Oh, there is one other point I wanted to make when you talk about getting more comfortable in the kitchen. And it kind of goes back to our family again, right? And generationally, right? Like the way we grew up. So our dad was out in the workforce doing his thing, became extremely successful in his own right, doing the things that he was doing. Um, and he had never, I mean, he probably, before he got married and before like he was like 10 years into the marriage, you could probably count on one hand the number of minutes that dude had spent in the kitchen.
No question.
Think about it, right? His mom cooked for him, and then my mom, our mom, his wife cooked for him. But because of the way my mom was, he started to feel more comfortable
Yeah.
getting into the kitchen, right? And I can just, think back like in his 40s, in his 50s, he got even more comfortable and to the point where he was doing Thanksgiving dinner, right? Pretty much, and he wanted to experiment with things, and he was bringing up recipes. So it doesn't matter how old you are. Um, this is not, a young person's game or a young people have to get into it, and learn. You can pick this up at any point in time. And it's just a question of getting in there and having some fun with it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
no question. Age has no, there's no barrier to entry. I mean, you can be any age. It's not too late to start. And like you said, Dad was, somewhat of a late bloomer. But, I remember back, actually, even before the times that you're talking about, maybe you can recall this too. I'm sure you can. But his first kind of, you know, entrance into the whole culinary land, and bless his heart because the things he took on were not the easiest things, but he started making ice cream.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that is still to this day. I mean, you have all these great machines out now. Well, I mean, you had this huge machine where you had to put the rock salt in, and I mean, it was just like prehistoric.
Yeah.
But that vanilla ice cream, I can still taste it,
Hmm.
and that was all him.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, kudos to him. And, you could also, I remember seeing, his face, as we're all sitting around eating this ice cream that he created, and it was just like he was more than just a businessman.
Yep.
He was more
Yep.
than just an executive out in the field. He connected with our family through providing something that with his own hands and his own, you know, following directions and structure and all that stuff. But he had this huge machine and was out on the back porch. And but to be able to do that and to watch the family eat something he created, I thought, I could see it in his face. It was just he was just so proud to be able to bring something to the family in that aspect. So I just think that's just one example of the reasons why I think learning the skill and getting out of your comfort zone and giving it a shot can really benefit your entire life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think there's other, as we're talking about this, it's bringing up some other thoughts for me and for your audience. Again, generationally at that time, his purview was the back porch and the backyard, and not only ice cream, but barbecue, right? His
Yeah.
purview was the grill, right? And when he started to realize, and my mom helped him see that there really wasn't a whole lot of difference between cooking the steak or the burger on the grill and cooking it on the stove in the kitchen. It's funny. You would think that that parallel would be obvious to somebody, but it wasn't until he got it pointed out. And so I think that's another thing to take if you're thinking about and wanting to get in the kitchen, but got a little bit of fear, a little anxiety, right? There's things that you already do or have done that are definitely translatable into that arena. Because I think about, the other thing you talk about taste, right? I'm like, you just conjured up all these memories about the ice cream and whatnot. But he had a special sauce for his burgers.
Yep.
Remember? He had a
I do.
special sauce that he pretty much created. I don't think that was a recipe that they got anywhere. I think he played around with some stuff. And I'm not going to mention exactly what the ingredients are. If you want to know what the ingredients are for that sauce is, send Brian an email or a direct message and he'll give it to you. But other than that, I'm not going to point it out because it was unique. And those burgers tasted like no other burgers on the planet and they were awesome.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I still use parts of that little trick he made. Yeah, I mean that was his go-to. And you're right, he created that by himself.
Yeah. And so simple. So
Yep.
simple. That's the other thing. It's like some of this stuff, right? Like you go into a restaurant and you taste something, you're like, oh my God, this is phenomenal, right? You oftentimes don't realize how simple it was to create that. And that's one of the things that I love about because when I ask Brian questions, I'm like, hey, I'm trying to do this. And granted, I've been doing this for a while, right? Because I said our mom taught us. So I've been in the kitchen for a little while. So some of the stuff I want to do and create is a little bit more advanced, perhaps, right? But still, I'll ask Brian, and I'm amazed at the simplicity of the answer. It's like, oh, well, you just need to do this and this and this. I'm like, really? I can get that taste from doing just that? And it's like, yeah, just put a little of that in there and build. But you got to put this piece in, that little secret ingredient, and that's what makes it pop, right? And little things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you hit on a big point that we definitely will talk about in all the podcasts because I think it's so important. And that is, I talk a lot about the reason I think you were surprised and many people are surprised about how simple something is, thinking it's going to be so overcomplicated, they just want to run away from it, is that they're looking at it from not from the foundation standpoint. So, and I've said many times, if you learn the basic foundations of cooking, right? Basically, what works and what doesn't work. If you just learn the understanding the basic tenets of cooking, which is not hard to learn, right? If you get that, then you open up a roadmap to be able to create whatever you want with no fear because you already have the base. And that's basically what Dad did with his burger sauce. He had a foundation.
Yeah.
Okay. There's one ingredient, like Dell said, we won't get into it today. But if you want to know, leave something in the comments. I'll send it to you. But he had one main ingredient that he loved, that he knew he loved, right? That he knew that if he added something to that main ingredient, almost anything is going to taste good because that was his foundation.
Yeah.
It's a very smart way to kind of create. And the same is true on a macro level that if you learn the basic foundations of cooking, which are basically, understanding the difference between sauteing and grilling and braising and boiling and baking. Okay. If you learn the different, okay. And then the second one is your different heat temperatures. Okay. You've got dry heat from the oven, you've got moist heat from steaming, and you have, your regular heat and how high. You want to cook on low, cook on medium, cook on high. All these things you have to play with, but when you understand how they all work together, then the final piece would be the seasonings. And I say, get rid of all of the spices, especially the ones that are blended for now. Just put them aside for a second and just start with basically kosher salt and black pepper.
Mm.
Okay. If you just deal with that first, that's your foundation. Okay. Before I do anything, it doesn't matter what I'm going to add to it. If I know that any protein that I'm about to cook, I season with kosher salt and black pepper on both sides. I know from there, I don't have to do anything. It's going to taste great. But if I then want to add some lemon pepper, or if I wanted to add some fresh basil, or I wanted to add some oregano, or some thyme, or some tarragon, or some garlic, or what have you, sky's the limit because I know I have my base covered.
Right.
And so
Right.
those are the basic foundations. And you know, you have helped me quite a bit in because you're the master at tech and business. And so you've helped me kind of put together a lot of programs and learning tools to offer to our audience on how to get those fundamentals. And one of them is my ebook. It's a blueprint. It's about 60 pages, but it literally walks you through everything from how to season, how to grill, how to saute, how to boil, how to braise, how to bake. It teaches you how to actually walk through a grocery store. Grocery
Yep.
stores are fascinating. You'll never go to a grocery store the same ever again if you listen to after you hear what I'm about to say. If you walk into your local grocery store, I promise you that if it has two entrances, on on the main entrance, which is depending on where you live and what store you're going to, if you go in your main entrance, I promise you that on the right side as you walk in, there's going to be one of two things. It's either going to be the bakery or it's going to be the deli. And the purpose of that is to get your taste buds going. You grab your cart, you're now smelling fresh baked goods or you're smelling fried chicken. Okay? By the time you get halfway in, you've only been in the store 3 minutes. You're hungry. So you've only planned to spend $5, $10, $20, whatever it may be. You end up spending double of that because the stores, the psychological effect of the stores is fascinating. And the way the stores are laid out are done on purpose. Now, I'm not saying in the book or the blueprint to avoid going in the entrance of a store. What I'm saying is that there are certain aisles, and when you look for products, you'll be able to discern which ones are best for what you're trying to do. One of the most interesting things I learned years ago that I think is fascinating is that if you go down, let's say the ketchup aisle, okay, and you're looking for ketchup, and so you see Heinz, you see Hunt's, and then you see your store brand ketchup, okay? So if that's the case, and let's say that Heinz is $5 a bottle and Hunt's is $4.75 a bottle, and the store label brand is $3 a bottle. And you automatically say, well, might as well get the Heinz, right? Or the Hunt's, because obviously better quality. Here's what you don't know. That store brand bottle is actually made by Heinz.
Yep.
And all they're doing is because your local stores doesn't have a manufacturer processing section in the back of their store making ketchup, right? So they have to get that ketchup from somewhere. So they go to these larger manufacturers that do nothing but make ketchup. And so Heinz makes the ketchup and then they just private label for that particular store. And the store doesn't have to produce the ketchup, but they do get a profit, which they share with Heinz on you buying the Heinz product, but with the store label on it.
Yep.
And so,
Yep.
and this is true for not just ketchup, but all different types of spices. So these are all things that are in the blueprint in the ebook that I honestly think you should pick up because it really will give you that first layer of foundation and techniques that you'll really be able to understand, which will kind of get you jump started onto just really preparing some amazing, amazing food, again, with tremendous confidence.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the ebook in just a second, but I just want to can I give the audience just a little business background or a little piece of business on the whole ketchup thing?
Absolutely.
You know, Heinz is not, just like Brian said, it is not a better ketchup. Heinz just simply had better commercials. And that's why you're gravitated toward it, right? And it's the same principle as walking in the store and having the bakery or the deli on the right, right? It's getting you primed. So you've been primed before you walk down that ketchup aisle because you saw all the Heinz commercials and you saw them dip it into French fries, which you might love, or you saw them, pouring it on something else, which you might love. So that's just that from a business standpoint. He's absolutely right. It's the same ketchup in the store brand bottle. Um, but I want to say, again, from my business background and what I do as an investor and investing in and partnering with small businesses, I read ebooks all day, every day. Okay. So I just want to say this, and I promise you, I ain't saying this because he's my brother. But what he's done here with this ebook, I don't think there's a cooking book, quote unquote, whether it's ebook or hard copy out there, anything like it. Because first of all, it's not a recipe book, it's not a cookbook, it's not even really a how-to manual. It's not a manual, right? It's not something that says, okay, these are the wheres and whys for baking. It's actually this resource, and the way that he describes the stuff, as I read it, it was like I was having the conversations with him that I have with him from time to time on the weekends before I want to make something. And he's got it all in this one volume that's not that hard to read, but it'll give you so much information just about feeling comfortable in the kitchen. If you haven't picked up a copy, I mean, he's got a price next to nothing. I keep telling him to raise the price, but he hadn't raised the price. So it's price next to nothing. So you ought to pick it up.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and I know you mean it because you certainly well you enjoy cooking, and you don't have that. I won't say you don't have zero fear. I think that's the reason you call, or that's the reason you reference the ebook, for yourself. You want to create something that has you know, the greatest possibility for success, which should be the goal for anybody. You've got kids, you've got family, your wife, and you love to cook, and you're like the main cook for the family. And there's something kind of exciting about family anticipating what you're going to create. And let's face it, there is a little bit, even for myself, even today, you don't want to let your family down, right? You don't want to let your neighbors down that you invited over for a dinner party. You don't want to let your neighbors down, or that invited over for a cookout or whatever have you. You just it's kind of like you feel responsible, but you enjoy it because, again, as I've said so many times, if you want to get high through natural, you know working out, as far as like doing something like cooking, there is a high to be involved there by watching other people enjoy what you've created. It's an amazing, amazing, just, I mean, rush that you
Yeah.
get
Yep. Yep. Yep.
when you watch people enjoy what you've made.
Yeah.
And
There's no question.
it's fascinating.
And I will say, because this is true whether you're a business entrepreneur and just building your business, or if you're brand new to golfing and you want to start golfing, it's true across the board. Um, the pursuit of that high and the pursuit of the wanting to please people, don't let it handcuff you, right? Don't let it stop you from getting in the kitchen and trying stuff. Use to your advantage the fact that it is your family. All right. Because even if it doesn't taste great, your family's not going to throw it back in your face because they're your family, right? They might say, Dad, this is not the best in the world, right? But then you learn from that, right? And you say, well, so what was it about that? And it's like, oh, maybe I added a little too much salt, or maybe had a little too much pepper. Then you go back and you correct it the next time. So you're always learning. And then you get to that point where they're eating it and they've got that smile on their face and they're going back for seconds and thirds. And again, that is, as Brian says, that is a total high.
I got to know your recipe.
I mean, when somebody's eating your stuff and they got a smile on your face, there's almost nothing better.
It, it's true. It is so true. It is so true. And that's why I'm trying to get 1,000 new cooks by the end of the year. And again, it's the purpose behind that is truly to introduce people who have shied away for whatever reason. And look, there's no shame at all. You are part of the majority if that's you, not the minority. There are millions upon millions of people that, for whatever reason, never were introduced to the possibility and the opportunity and the just the confidence that they actually don't have to eat out every night or take out every night or drive through. That you could actually create something for yourself that tastes as good, if not better, than your local restaurant and save a ton of money. And then if you've got a partner or a family to be able to feed them, save a ton of money. But, you know, getting that request and back to our family, Dell, real quick, I remember all of us kind of had a request for mom on occasion, I mean, I think mine was tacos for years, can you make tacos this week? And she said, well, we'll do it Friday. Or, we had breakfast on weekends as a family almost every morning. And I remember that was a big deal,
Mhm.
everyone had kind of their own thing. I mean, even even little things like people think cooking has got to be this complicated thing. One of my first kind of entrances into pleasing the family was taking the orange juice out of, we used to buy the frozen cans of orange juice concentrate. And you add water to it, and you take the wooden spoon and you mix it around, and and it's Tropicana, I think, and we pour it into a pitcher and put it in the middle of the table, and that was, the orange juice for breakfast. And I decided one time that I was going to find a faster way to do it instead of stirring, and I decided to put it in a blender. And it worked. It got a little foamy on top, and I poured it into the pitcher and put it on the table. And everybody's like, "This looks great!" And the foam kind of added another texture to it, and it was amazing. And that was like my first like aha moment of, okay, again, I had the base, it was the can, water, and then I used a different technique,
Yeah. Yep.
and it was successful.
Yeah.
I created it was the same orange juice, but it created a different texture because of the blender versus just stirring it by hand. And so all those little things add up to building confidence, one little inch, one little step at a time that gets you to say, you know what? I'm gonna make my own, steak tonight, or I'm gonna make my own, pasta tonight, spaghetti and meatballs, or I'm gonna make my own hamburgers tonight on the stove. It's not that complicated if you just follow some basic techniques.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. No question. And as we're talking, and we might, if we get bold enough, we'll maybe one of our podcasts we should talk about the mistakes we've made.
Well, we should talk about at least one mistake every podcast because I think it's important for everyone to know that no one should be ashamed about making mistakes.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it
and
happens. It
it
happens,
happens. Yeah.
And I have a rule and a saying, and I mean it with all sincerity every time I cook something and I put it down before my family. I always say this. I said, if this doesn't taste good, you don't have to eat it. And even just saying that, and I recommend that to anybody. You can use this because it's been such a big psychological help for me, right? It's because now they know why I did it for them. They know that I want it to taste great, but they also know that I'm not forcing it on them, right? And so it's just like, hey, you know my deal. If this doesn't taste good, you don't have to eat it, and no bones about it. And of course, I always have a frozen pizza in the freezer. So if something really is a disaster, I just leave the frozen pizza in, and then that's what we got for dinner. So anyway, just a little tip there is what I do.
That's a great point. Because I think sometimes people, maybe that's one of the reasons people don't want to kind of venture into the kitchen because they're afraid that it may not turn out well, and their family's going to look at them, sideways and this, that, and the other. Um, but having that little verbal disclaimer is is huge. You're giving your family permission to say, look, if this doesn't, and again, let's back up. It doesn't mean the dish was horrible. It just
Right.
means their taste buds weren't in line with what you made. Okay.
Right.
Number one. Number two, one of the things to add on to what you said that I still tell people to this day, because I really believe in this, that is, you know, eat until you're full. Don't eat to clean your plate, so to speak. Now, that's something that was, you know, I think a lot of parents force children to, eat everything on their plate, which I get, you got to get your vegetables, you got to get a well-rounded meal. I get all that. I'm not, poo-pooing anybody that is trying to get their kids to eat well-rounded. Kudos to you. What I am saying though, especially in particular to adults, um, we food doesn't food is more than just, you know, filling your belly. It should be enjoyed. It should be, and everything kind of comes to its end, right? If you have that last bite and you go, ah, that was perfect, and there's still like a little bit left on your plate, you should not feel obligated to eat the last two bites because you're content. And part of getting up from the table and feeling just right is to give yourself permission to go, that was perfect, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It's so important, so, so important.
Yeah. And that's why your comment about seasonings, and I love the comment about the salt and pepper because it's amazing what those two ingredients can do to just about anything, right? And you don't need much else, right? Um, but what I was going to say is I want to just add to that just a little bit of the sort of physiology and brain work, right? Um, your body and your brain really kind of crave things that taste good. And oftentimes, if especially like if you go to a restaurant that's not that good, or eating out somewhere and it's not that great, you will tend to eat more because your body's still looking for that great taste. And as simple as it sounds, it's actually kind of as stupid as it sounds, it will tell you to keep eating because it keeps searching for that taste. And when you start to get better in the kitchen, and it doesn't take a whole lot, it's just a little bit, know about the salt and pepper and a few other spices. When you give them that, they're like, oh, that is great. That does taste great. Now I'm good, right? I'm full. My taste buds are full. Everything's been enlivened. I'm good. And yeah, that's a great place to be in. And you can definitely get there easily, especially with some of the tips that you're sharing with folks.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I think some people would find this hard to believe, but this is an absolute honest to God truth about our first restaurant that we owned together. We did not have salt and pepper on the tables.
Yep. Yep.
The customer had to request it.
All right.
And the reason for that was, and this is true for why a lot of people used to say, they didn't like what was served to them as children. And so let's just say that you did properly season some food and you served it to your family, and there's salt and pepper on the table. There is this, I think, mostly American natural habit. Before tasting your food, you take the salt and the pepper and you just go like this. Whatever it is, eggs, steak, pasta, chicken, salmon, whatever. And you're just seasoning it on top, not knowing that the person that cooked the meal properly already had seasoned it. So now when you take your first bite, it's completely over seasoned. Like it's just horrible. And Your instinct, your is like, oh, they don't know how to cook, or it's too much salt. You oversee. No, 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 no. By you putting more on top without tasting it first, that's what happened. And so we remove the salt and pepper to give the customer the opportunity to first taste it and to see if it's properly seasoned. And if they wanted some more of something, we would obviously provide it for them. But I think that's a great place if you're just a family at home and you're starting out in the kitchen. Take the salt and pepper off the dinner table because let your family and friends taste what you've created as you have presented it. Because I can promise you, if you use the basic foundation techniques of seasoning, you're not going to have to worry about anyone adding more because it'll be right where it needs to be. You'll always find one or two people that may want some more. That's fine. But I promise that when you learn how to properly season food in its raw state, and then as you cook it, it goes through another transformation, and another transformation, and another transformation. And then by the time it gets to the table, it's not the same dish. And so to add more at that time, it's unnecessary. So if you remove, don't give them the opportunity to over season, just take that salt and pepper off and then go from there. I think you're going to have great, great success in the flavor palettes. You'll be able to start really understanding your palate, because salt really can, especially raw iodized salt on top of already cooked food, it's like raindrops rolling off of a hill. It's like you're adding something that doesn't need to be there.
Yep. Yep.
And so if you can avoid that, that's a really, really good first step.
Yeah, let me just add to that sort of the flip side of that coin. It's a great suggestion about taking the salt and pepper off the table for your family. Totally recommend and suggest you do that. The flip side of that is I would suggest that you start to get into the habit yourself of taking a bite of whatever food is in front of you before you do anything else. You'll become a better cook by doing that because before you cloud it with other stuff that you automatically put on it, you can taste it and go, this person cooked this piece of fish just right, or this person, seasoned these potatoes just right. Or if I was making these potatoes, I might add a little extra salt. And so that gives you that it's just a quick way for you to get more proficient at what you're doing in the kitchen.
Well, now you're embarking on something I talk about all the time. So that's a great segue into this term that that I think a lot of people it just goes over their head because they just don't quite get it. And it's never explained. And that's the term season to taste. You see it everywhere. You see it in all these cookbooks. And anyone that's followed me for a while now knows that I use this great line that I'm sure someone out there is saying, what is he talking about? But I always say cookbooks cannot and will not and never will be able to teach you how to cook, right? A cookbook cannot teach you how to cook. It just can't. It's nothing but a guide. And if you don't understand the foundations, the recipes are useless. Okay. But season to taste, you'll see in a lot of recipes and cookbooks. During a cooking process, stop, taste, let your palate digest it, adjust. That's seasoning to taste. If you don't taste along the way, you would not know when to season. Okay? It's just taking control. You're in control. And you can just slowly, and as cooking cooks, as I like to say, let cooking cook. As the process goes, those flavors will start to change and they will mold into a different flavor. And 10 minutes later, it'll be a different flavor. Salt will intensify as your meal reduces down. So it's very important to taste from the middle, from the beginning to the middle to the end. And that last one at the end, when you taste it, then you know, okay, we are right on. Oh, it's perfect. And that's when you know, okay, it's time to serve.
Yep, yep, yep. No, that's so important. So important. So I think as we tend to do, I think we've covered a lot of stuff today. And I think folks, I'm hoping that they're feeling a little bit better about being in the kitchen and a little bit better about just how comfortable it can be and how easy it can be. And I think there's some great tools that we've talked about and some tips that we talked about. And as I said again, give another shameless plug. Get the ebook if you haven't gotten the ebook yet, because it's phenomenal. But I was thinking, Brian, maybe we can get him out of here on this one kind of question I have for you. It kind of part and parcel of things that we talked about before. Again, the key seasonings, salt and pepper. Can you talk just a little bit about salt, like the type of salt that you use and you recommend, and just tell folks a little bit about what it does? Because I've had conversations with you over the years about this, right? And a number. I mean, we could talk probably for an hour just on salt and seasoning and how it works. But just give everybody a little snippet if you can, just like what salt you use and a little bit about what its primary function is.
Absolutely. Great question. I 100% of the time using kosher salt, which can be found in the grocery store in the salt aisle. You're going to see, to Dell's point about Heinz a little bit ago, it's the same for Morton's iodized salt. You'll see more, you've got the girl with the umbrella. I mean, the marketing and the advertising in some of these food companies is amazing. And we get brainwashed, right? So you go to the store, you're looking for the cylinder with the blue and the umbrella, and it says Morton's and it's iodized salt, and that's what you're going to grab, right? It's a huge mistake because it's so ground and so fine and so dense and so powerful that you will never be able to regulate properly how salty something's getting or how much more salt you need. And salt is a very, very powerful chemical. I mean, it's used in brines. Salt has the ability to actually start a cooking process with raw food. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds and any of this stuff, but technically, one of the things that Dell and I know a lot about, because our second restaurant was a barbecue restaurant, and we used to dry rub all of our meats. And the process, the main foundation of dry rubbing was to start the cooking process before we started smoking. Well, how do we do that? Well, we added the combination of salt and sugar on the protein actually breaks down the fat tissue, which is going to make the meat kind of moist and fall off the bone. Okay, that's serious pro tip. But the salt is what's doing that, right? That's how powerful salt is. Kosher salt is just as powerful, but it allows you to it does not it's not as fine and pure, so you know exactly how much to put in, and it's not going to iodized salt when you put it in, it immediately will take a dish from 0 to 10 on a salt level. Kosher salt, and then as it reduces on iodized salt, it even gets more potent. So you may taste it at the halfway point, and by the end, you can't even stand it. It's horrible. You have to throw it out because the salt has reduced that much that it's just a mess. Whereas kosher salt will maintain its its body from start to finish. So what you taste in the middle and what you taste at the end, as far as the salt content, will be absolutely perfect. So salt is so, so important. Now, there's what we call finishing salt. So there's like pink Himalayan salt you may see sometimes. You can get some expensive salt. Salt was a currency back in the
Yeah.
18, 1700s, you know. That's how famous and powerful it was. Um, but it was also used for as a preservative, because it would, you pack something in salt, it preserves it. So it has so many uses. But as far as cooking on a regular, kosher salt. And by the way, Morton's also understood this. And so if you go to the store, they also have a blue Morton's kosher salt, but it's not in the cylinder, it's in a square box. So when you go to the grocery store, again, all this is in the ebook, but you'll see a blue box with the girl with the umbrella, and it'll say Morton's is the brand name, and it'll say kosher salt. And you might find two. One will say coarse and one will say regular. Get the regular. Coarse would be more if like you were trying to make ice cream like my dad did years ago, or you wanted to maybe use it for something else, I wouldn't get into that. Just get the regular kosher salt. Another thing you want to look out for is don't get, sometimes they're also up against what they now call ice cream salt, which is rock salt, a whole other ball game. So just be careful on what you're looking for. But a kosher salt, and then to go with that, cracked black pepper. And what I mean by cracked black pepper is you can go ahead and grind yourself if you want. I find that's a little harder to see how much is actually getting on whatever you're seasoning. So I like to just get already ground black pepper, kind of a medium coarse grind. Um, if you get the pure powder, again, you're not sure how much you're actually getting on all your meats. So you may overdo it. So when it's a little more coarse, you have a much better and easier way of seeing it and knowing exactly how much to put on, and you'll have much more success in your seasoning process. But I guess if we had to label this show, Dell, it would be called Season to Taste because it really is so important, and it's a great place to start off this podcast because it's the number one foundation to start with,
Yeah.
learning how to season properly, and it doesn't take but two ingredients. That's how easy cooking can be.
Yeah. And back to another point that you made earlier about you see a recipe and you see fractions and all that sort of stuff. The nice thing that I'm hearing about the the kosher salt is that it's closer to your natural eyeball and feel. So
Yes.
if you were to sprinkle that on something, you kind of have a feeling of like that's too much or that's too little, that's just right. That is, it's going to be consistent with that. Whereas if you put the iodized salt on, you might think that's what it should look like, but it's going to be way too much.
Yep.
So yeah, so it's that this is just another little tip like that's got in the ebook that gives you a way to eyeball, so you don't have to worry about those fractions as much, and you become just more comfortable in the kitchen. That's what it's all about, right? That's what you're all about, and that's what you want these thousand or more people to get and be is just be more comfortable in the kitchen.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, awesome.
So we're gonna wrap it up. We want to thank everybody for watching. We've always enjoyed this. We'll be back at you soon with another episode. In the meantime, love to hear if you have anything you would like us to discuss, any questions that you have that you would like us to go into. You want to hear more family stories? We got 1,000 of them, which are fascinating and fun and always fun to talk about. Um, but one of the things Dell had mentioned earlier in the conversation today was about, our faux pas, our mistakes, which I think is important to bring to the table. So, if you want to hear about Dell's famous making syrup recipe for the first time and how that turned out, leave that in the comments below. I think that would be a fun story to share on the next podcast.
You had to go there. You had to go there. It is actually a pretty funny memory, and I would be happy if folks want to hear it. I'll be happy to share it. We'll
I
see what they
think
say.
I think it's only fair to share the syrup story.
Ah,
Uh,
all right, good deal. Good deal.
this has been great. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in. We'll see you guys on the next one. And Dell, thanks again. Amazing
Yep.
co-host, amazing older brother, and for helping me out and everything that I struggle with as far as tech and all kinds of things that scare me about business. And of course, anybody can learn all kinds of things about business. I cannot get off this episode without telling people that you have your own YouTube channel that
True.
it
Yep.
talks that actually teaches people how to succeed in business over 40 years old, especially in particular talking about tech, which believe me is needed because we're all freaking out. What do I do?
It changes so fast. It changes so fast. But just like cooking, there's some ground rules, right? And there's a foundation. If you can get that foundation, then you're good to go, and you can pile it. You can add to that over time. So,
Yeah,
same
I
thing.
highly recommend it. Tell them where they can find you, Del. It's at Del Lewis, right?
At four
Four
Del
Del
Lewis.
Lewis.
At the number four Del Lewis. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And Del just has one L. So DELLEWIS. Yep.
yeah. So I'll put the link actually in the description box below if anybody
Uh,
wants to check out Dell's channel. He's teaching people over 40 in particular, any age, obviously, but if you're over 40 and you struggle with tech and you're in business or want to get into business, he's amazing at it. And he talks, believe me, his whole background is incredible. And it's one of the reasons why we owned restaurants together because I left him alone, he left me alone. So,
That's why it works.
yeah.
Uh,
All right. Thanks,
all right.
everybody.
Yep.
We'll see you on the next podcast. And until then, remember always eat well and stay healthy. See you next time.
All right.